Hej, jag heter Anders Nilsson och jobbar på ESET. Idag har vi haft en helt underbar Cybersecurity Day i Köpenhamn. Och vi har sparat 3 videos till er som inte kunde se dem på plats. Då har vi bland annat så har vi om cyberhot som har drabbat Ukraina i samband med kriget. Vi har även en video om machine learning och AI och hur både kriminella och oss som försvarar oss mot dem använder det. Och vi har även en video om hotlandskapet och hur det ser ut nu. Tack så mycket.
Go into a little bit more detail, as the previous speaker mentioned, into the things that we see in terms of cyber attacks in Ukraine, and due to our unique visibility and our presence in defending Ukrainian critical infrastructure, as well as both public and private sector organizations, we do see quite a lot. So my name is Robert Lipovsky, and all of the things that I'll be presenting here are the results of our research, both my team and the other research teams that we have in ESET. So let's get right to it. Could I ask the directors to move the slide so I can see the current slide and the notes half by half, please? Okay, so we all know about the events that happened on the 24th of February. And then, just a couple of hours before the invasion actually took place, we have seen a disruptive piece of malware that we labeled Hermetic Wiper spread in Ukraine. This, of course, predated the attack. Once we discovered it, we were analyzing it quite heavily, not knowing what would happen the next morning. Then another important event on this timeline, and the most noteworthy, the most impactful, or well, I wouldn't say impactful, but definitely the most noteworthy attack that we've seen in Ukraine was in Destroyer 2, and I'll get to all of this and we'll cover it in quite a lot of detail in just a second. But before we get into that, before we get into all of those details, let's take a step back in time, because these things, these highly advanced cyber attacks against Ukrainian targets have been happening for quite some time. And we have been seeing an increased number of cyber attacks since around 2014. So there are a lot of APT groups. We're tracking all of these campaigns and attributing them to various groups. Some of them you can see here, and we don't have time to get into all of those attacks here. So, and even this is not a comprehensive list. So these are just some of the ones that I picked that I think are the most notable ones. But there are more even. And we'll highlight this one, which in my opinion is the most infamous one and has been causing the most wide damage. This group has been attributed by the US DOJ, as well as the UK agencies to the Russian GRU. And in October 2020, this indictment came out with the indictment of these 6 Knights Fellows. Okay, in case you're wondering where the name Sandworm comes from, how did this name came to light? Well, this is where it got its name from. So in one of the early black energy cases, we've seen this. These are actually decrypted, so they were encoded strings within the command and control server domain, domains listed there. And these were being used by the black energy malware in some of the early campaigns around 2014. So apparently, these attackers were fans of Frank Herbert's classic novel. That's where Sandworm got its name from. Okay, so we've been tracking the activities of this threat group for a really long time now, and we've detected their attacks against high-value targets in Ukraine since even before this, since around the end of 2013 is when they intensified. We detected some Sandworm campaigns even before that, around 2012, but they really intensified at the end of 2013 and the beginning of 2014. So this correlates with the geopolitical situation that was happening there, the beginning of the war in Donbass and the Russian occupation of Crimea. Sandworm targeted all types of organizations, so its targeting was really broad. They included government, diplomatic, media organizations, transportation, so all areas of the country, all types of industries. One of the main methods that Sandworm was using to infiltrate the targeted organizations was through carefully crafted spear phishing emails. And they have been using this as their main way of getting inside of these networks for all those years. It was not the only method, but it is the most commonly used methods. Here's one example that actually used the war in Donbass as a lure. I'll use my cheat sheet here for the translation. So this email reads that Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who was the prime minister at the time, is instructing the Prosecutor General's office, the Security Service of Ukraine, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the Ministry of Justice to check all members of parliament, parties, and NGOs in Ukraine for their involvement, alleged involvement, in the support of rebels in the east of Ukraine. And that in the attachment, you would see the list of these potential alleged supporters who are conspiring with the separatists in Donbass. So this is the attachment. Of course, with a theme like this, the recipients would probably have a high chance of opening this. So this is really good social engineering here. These are not your common Nigerian prince scams. And what was happening in the background is, even from a technical point of view, this was pretty important and pretty impactful, because this was actually using a 0-day in PowerPoint to launch the Black Energy malware in the background. So the victim could have all the latest and greatest versions installed, all their Windows, their Microsoft Office, all their applications patched, and they would still be infected because of the Sandworm using this 0-day vulnerability. Once we discovered it, we worked with Microsoft, reported it, and eventually it got patched. So this is the other part in that presentation. What was Black Energy about? So it was a pretty general purpose cyber weapon. So it was a modular framework. It consisted of a main module communicating with the command and control server. Some of those domains that I showed you in the earlier slide were using the Sandworm book references. And it was modular, meaning that its functionality relied on these different plugins, some of the examples that you can see here. And it's the typical functionality that you would expect from a tool like this. So stealing various types of sensitive information off of their targets, as well as plugins allowing them lateral movement across the network. Black Energy was used in many campaigns. There were a lot of waves, a lot of campaigns in Ukraine against many organizations. But definitely the most notable attack was the one against the Ukrainian power grid. So this was the culmination of this campaign, a very visible culmination that we've seen in December 2015, because this was the first ever blackout caused by a cyber attack. This attack, it was, I say, facilitated, and I underline that word, facilitated, because Black Energy didn't cause the blackout directly, but instead it opened the door for the attackers and enabled them to do it. It was carried out in a coordinated manner against at least 4 electric distribution companies in various regions all around the country, so-called Oblenergo companies from Oblast regional electric distribution companies. So the attackers misused remote access connections to manually switch off the flow of electricity to de-energize these substations, and as an effect, the homes of around 250,000 Ukrainians across the nation went dark for up to 6 hours, depending on which region was targeted. So that was December 2015. That was the first mass power outage caused by a cyber attack, but the attackers didn't stop there. And almost exactly 1 year later, there was another blackout. This one was not facilitated. This was directly caused by a piece of malware which we named InDestroyer. And this time the attackers stepped up their game. There were quite a number of differences between the attack previously. We know of only one electricity substation being hit, but a large one this time, Kiev North transmission substation. So the potential impact would have been even greater. And I'm using the conditional would have been because the attackers ultimately did not accomplish their intended goals. The malware they used in Destroyer, unlike Black Energy before, it was the first ever malware specifically designed to attack power grids. And what that means exactly is that it was going after these kinds of devices. So here you see examples from two different vendors, Siemens and ABB. Both of these protection relays were targeted by Indestroyer. And it was able to do this on scale. It was able to send commands to these devices. It, so to speak, spoke the language of this hardware using one of specific industrial communication protocols. I'm not going to go into all the technical details about its architecture, but what's important here is that this launcher component was hardwired triggered to launch these disruptive payloads at a specific time. So that was December 17th at 2200 hours, 27 minutes UTC time. And then it executed these payloads. So these are the individual payloads for each of those communication protocols. This is not the typical capability of regular malware that we see on a daily basis. And this wasn't it. So these were the modules that would be used to send commands to these devices to effectively open circuit breakers and cause the blackout and de-energize the substation. But there were other components to this attack to amplify this impact and to cause even greater damage. One of those components was a data wiper, and as you'll see in the other types of attacks that I'll be talking about, this is kind of a common theme for sandworms, so also for having wiper capability. Similar wiper capabilities were also present in the Black Energy campaigns. So this was used to deny the operators at those substations visibility and control of their environment, and of course to make recovery from this incident a lot more difficult. And then there was another functionality, which is probably the most important and most impactful one, especially in combination with these previous ones, and that's a denial of service attack against specific Siemens Cybertech protection relays. What this means, these protection relays are in place to balance out the power grid, to protect from unsafe conditions. There are overcurrent protection relays. There are various types of protection relays, not going to electrical engineering class, but it's really important for the grid to have them in place and protect the grid and protect the hardware on site. So Indestroyer was attempting to take these devices offline using a previously known vulnerability. So in this case, it was not a 0-day, and it was described also in this ICS cert, now under CISA advisory. And why were they doing that? What were they trying to accomplish with that? So the attackers already knew from the Black Energy incident in 2015 that the Ukrainian operators had both the capability and the willingness to go into manual mode of operations. So they expected that they would recover from this attack, from those 4 payloads sending the commands to de-energize the substation, so that they would switch to manual mode and try to restore the flow of electricity. So they expected that. And then, since their visibility and control of the environment was denied through the data wiper module, they would take off these protection relays, take them offline, and once they would go into manual mode and restore the flow of electricity, then this could potentially lead them to unsafe conditions in the environment and potentially even causing physical damage to equipment. And thus, the attempted damage was not a matter of a blackout lasting hours, but the attackers intended for a much larger scale and much longer duration blackout that could potentially last weeks, even months, during which the equipment would have to be repaired, restored, and so on. Fortunately, this did not happen. There were lots. The Ukrainian operators were able to recover. They had past experience from the previous incident already. And there were also some flaws, some bugs in the code of Industry, and they ultimately failed in these grand ambitions. But it did cause a blackout, nevertheless, lasting for around 1 hour. Okay, so let's move on with the other types of attacks that this group has under its belt, and I think NotPetya doesn't need a long introduction, so I'll quickly go through this. This was a disruptive fall ransomware, so it was masquerading as ransomware, but financial gain was not its motivation. And it spread all over the country. So its goal was to disrupt, to sow chaos, to disrupt operations throughout the whole country of Ukraine. I mean, people couldn't buy gas at gas stations. People couldn't pay at point-of-sale terminals. And how did they accomplish this? So that was through pretty aggressive spreading mechanisms implemented in the code, including the eternal blue vulnerabilities there, but not only those other vulnerability, other mechanisms as well. And it was able to spread all over the country because of a supply chain attack of financial software that was the most popular financial software in Ukraine, used in the majority of businesses, and that is MEDOC. So this was a supply chain attack against this legitimate company. And through the updates of MEDOC, all of its customers, all of its users of their software would then be infected. And through this backdoor, basically, the attackers would then be able to launch the NotPetya infection. And then NotPetya itself would have further mechanisms for spreading. And because of VPN connections, even outside of the country, as we all know, the potential, the destructive impact was felt not only within Ukraine, but also all over the world, including some of the world's largest corporations like Maersk and so on. So according to some of the estimates, this has become the most damaging, the most costly cyber attack in history. And according to the reported damages by the affected corporations, they add up to over $10 billion in damages. Okay, so these were some of those most notable, most noteworthy attacks by Sandworm in the past. And then in the recent years, 2018, 2019, things kind of quieted down. But the important thing to note here is that the group continued its activities, but they were a little less visible. They kept a lower profile until now. So now we're moving to the more present events. I already mentioned Hermetic Wiper, which happened just a couple of hours before the invasion. So this started shortly before 5 p.m. Ukrainian local time. This was a pretty busy night, so we spent analyzing this, and we reported on this pretty quickly, including on our research Twitter account. Of course, not knowing the events that we would wake up to the next morning. We found Hermetic Wiper on hundreds of systems in at least 5 Ukrainian organizations, and it was trying to corrupt the data in these organizations to render them unbootable. So again, a disruptive functionality. And of course, as a result of this, any public-facing services that were run by these organizations, then they would not be accessible. On a technical level, what it was doing is basically would overwrite the master boot record, the master file table, files the hives containing the registry, Windows registry, and also several other critical parts on the hard drives with random bytes. It would also disable the volume shadow copy service to make recovery efforts more difficult. The compilation timestamp. Do know that compilation timestamps can be faked by attackers, but what we've been seeing in a lot of these attacks is that these timestamps coincide with our telemetry. And in a lot of the cases, the attackers just simply don't bother. So I think we can assume that these compilation timestamps are valid. So this means that the attack, that the preparation for this attack predated for at least 2 weeks. So the malware was created 2 weeks before it was actually launched. Why the name Hermetic Wiper? Because this malware, not only Wizard, but also the other ones that I'll talk about in just a second, they use code signing certificates published or assigned to a Cypriot company called Hermetica Digital. We requested the issuing certificate authority to revoke them after, and they did after we announced it. There are various theories as to what happened. One potential and likely one is that this was an organization that the attackers impersonated and then got this certificate from DigiCert. But Hermetic Wiper was not deployed in isolation. There were other pieces of malware deployed in this destructive campaign, and that's Hermetic Wizard. That's the second piece, and this is a worm. So this has the capability to spread on the local network and to deploy Hermetic Wiper. It was using various modules. There were WMI spreaders and there were SMB spreaders. And the third piece that was used in tandem with Hermetic Wiper and Hermetic Wizard was Hermetic Ransom, which again appeared as a ransomware written in Go and deployed around the same time. So this was actually a bit puzzling. I mean, if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense. Like why deploy a ransomware when you're deploying a wiper as well? But from a high-level perspective, it resembles what we've seen in the past, kind of with NotPetya. So perhaps this was to hide the wiper's actions, make it appear as ransomware. Also, what's interesting is that there's also a reference. So the SMB spreader in Hermetic Wizard was named Romance DLL. It was not using the Eternal Romance exploit, the exploit of the Eternal Romance vulnerability, but it certainly was a reference to that. Here's an example of the ransom note that was displayed by Hermetic Ransom. And here are some Easter eggs left in the binary. So, some messages perhaps by the attackers. Then on March 14th, we found yet another wiper in Ukraine, and these are not even all of them that we've seen. So I'm deliberately taking some of them out because there were just so many that we've uncovered. And this one was Caddy Wiper, named after the file name that the malware used. Here's a quick compilation of what it looks like, what its activities look like, and it's doing a pretty similar thing to Hermetic Wiper. So it's wiping the critical parts of the computer and then making them unbootable. But this one was one of the most sophisticated wipers in terms of implementation that we've seen. What's particularly noteworthy is that it was avoiding the destruction of domain controllers. So this was likely to maintain the attacker's access inside that organization. So not to cripple the AD, but to keep that access and destruct all of the other machines. We've seen this on a few dozen systems in a limited number of organizations in financial sector, like a bank, for example. And there were some similarities to Hermetic Wiper as well. For example, it was being deployed by group policies. Again, an indication that this was a planned APT type of attack and that the attackers had prior access in those targeted systems for some time before. And then on April 8th, we discovered, with the tight cooperation with the Ukrainian CERT, another version, the second version of InDestroyer. So after all of these wipers, this was, as I mentioned, the most notable discovery in terms of malware tradecraft during the conflict. The good news here is that it didn't accomplish even what Indestroyer 1 accomplished. And I'll get to a couple of the reasons why that happened. So this was the third case in history where malware tried to tamper with the distribution of electricity and to trigger blackout. It was the third time that this was done by Sandworm, and the third time it was done in Ukraine, and this time during the ongoing war happening there. So this attack was thwarted, and thanks to ESET, we were able to analyze this incident. So this kudos to them, and a really good response here, and also the affected Obel Energo company, which we are not naming, but this serves electricity for a region with over 2 million people. So had this attack been successful, the impact would have been of over 2 million people being left in the dark in the times that Ukraine is in right now. There are a number of notable differences between Indestroyer 2 and Indestroyer 1. But before getting into those, the compilation timestamp here goes to March 23rd. So again, planning the attack for at least 2 weeks. So this is the evidence for what we have, at least, but most likely even a lot further back than that. And the most notable technical difference is that if you remember those protocols that Indestroyer 1 spoke, of the 4 of them, Indestroyer 2 speaks only one. It speaks only IEC 104, and that's due to various developments in the energy industry, and for the attackers evaluating that this would be the most effective to achieve their goals. It also fixed some of the flaws that were within Indestroyer 1, apparently. They attempted to make this work this time, and the good news is that the defenders were able to mitigate and protect from this threat executing. But there is actual code similarity with the previous version of Indestroyer, so it appears that they originate from the same source code. Just one quick example is this function, so you can notice some of the text strings that are reused are actually same or very similar. Okay, and similar to Indestroyer, Indestroyer 2 was actually a lot simpler in architecture. So if you mention that diagram with the modular framework of Indestroyer 1, Indestroyer 2 was executed as a single executable, which implemented this IEC 104 protocol, but it was actually co-deployed with other pieces of malware. So standalone executables, but it was launched with those as well. And this is one that I've mentioned already, and that was a new version of Caddy Wiper. So it was wiping again the C/users folder and the whole hard drives from D onwards, overwriting all the files with zeros. And again, erasing the master boot record or the GPT, making the machine unbootable. What's interesting is that this new version of Caddy Wiper was launched by a new loader that ESET named ArguePatched. And what's interesting about it is that it was a patched version of the remote IDA Pro debugger server. IDA Pro is a piece of software that we are using to analyze this malware. So it's a tool for reverse engineers, and there's no real good reason to name this in an electrical substation. Electrical substation operators don't use IDA. So this was not an attempt to masquerade it as some legitimate piece of software that would be used in this environment. This was likely the attackers trolling us analysts. In addition to these pieces of malware targeting Windows machines, there were also wipers targeting Linux and Solaris. So that's SoloShred and AwfulShred. And OrgShred is actually, again, so you can see a recurring theme here. This is an actually a worm component spreading either solo shred or alpha shred, depending on the operating system that's being used. Here is a timeline of the events as it unfolded according to the things that we've seen. So first, Cadiwiper was launched on some Windows machines, and then the Linux and Solaris malware was launched in the environment. Then the attackers created a scheduled task to launch InDestroyer 2. The execution of InDestroyer 2 was timed to 16 hours, 10 minutes UTC time. And then after that, there was a scheduled execution of Cadiwiper on that same machine, probably to erase traces to cover their tracks after InDestroyer had run. As I mentioned in the beginning, there are many more APT groups conducting attacks against Ukraine that we don't have time to go into today. But we do often publish our findings on all of these groups. We track them closely. You can read a lot about these discoveries in our public We Live Security blog posts. And that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation and wrap up. So if we look at this from a higher perspective, what were the attackers' main objectives? And we can divide them into two categories. The first one being espionage and data collection. That's kind of the silent phase. And then it's the visible phase of the sabotage and signaling to the victim, signaling to the enemy. These objectives are not mutually exclusive, so we quite often see campaigns combining these two. First, it's the espionage phase, and then the attackers will make themselves known through the disruptive capability. Okay, so what's next? We certainly can expect the attacks to continue. We've mostly spoke about Ukraine, but Sandworm, as well as some of the other APT groups that have been targeting Ukraine, have been targeting other countries as well. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And users, defenders, IT admins need to stay alert. And at ESET, we'll continue monitoring the attackers' activity and, of course, protecting users of our security software, but also provide actionable threat intelligence in our threat intelligence report or our threat intelligence feeds. And also, since a lot of this information, we feel that it's necessary to also publish and reveal publicly, so we publish a lot of this on our Twitter account. So with that, thank you for listening.
So thank you very much, Robert. Why don't you join me for a moment over here? I know that we're the last thing between the presentations and coffee, so we'll get through this quite quickly. You talked about, really sort of focused on the attacks, and we know that this is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the sort of what's really been going on for many, many years, right back until before the Russian annexation of Crimea. But overall, looking at sort of the specific period from, during wartime, after the 24th of February and your sort of immediate preceding, how would you sort of evaluate these wartime attacks against Ukraine overall? You've sort of noted a difference in sophistication and in techniques, but overall, what's your sort of kind of evaluation of how it's gone? Has it been sort of subject to the same, let's say, sort of lapses in logistical ability and coordination that we've seen on the military scene?
Yeah, so it's good news that a lot of these, like InDestroyer 2, a lot of these highly ambitious attacks failed, and the defenders were able to mitigate them also with our help. But definitely, they did a tremendous job and were prepared for this. So that's good. In terms of technically speaking, we see both sophisticated attacks and less sophisticated attacks. So attacks using off-the-shelf malware, attacks that are difficult to attribute because it allows them to stay under the radar and I guess in some way have plausible deniability. But what I would definitely, how I would evaluate it is that we have seen a number in terms of the numbers, there has been a huge spike. So I mean, the numbers of wipers that we've discovered since February 23rd is just out of the ordinary. So we haven't seen such high number of disruptive pieces of malware being used in the past. So there was kind of a shift from the espionage and preparation phases to the actual sabotage attempts. So it's the rise in numbers and the rise in aggressiveness of their attacks, definitely.
So you talked about the sort of relative sophistication. So Hermetic Wiper, for instance, wasn't particularly sophisticated in its construction, but it sort of obviously was effective. What's your sort of take on the whether these groups are sort of coordinated or working together? Obviously Sandworm has used lots of different techniques, but we also see activities from Invisimol, from Gamaredon and so on, and they're sort of perhaps Gamaredon's most consistently been attacking Ukraine over the years, probably operating out of Crimea. But what's your sort of take on the sort of coordination between them? Sometimes it seems like they might be stepping on each other's toes a bit and not always coordinating the attacks.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really difficult to speculate what might be happening behind the scenes. But exactly, Gamaredon is the APT group that's been most active in the past couple of years, much more active than Sandworm, definitely. Sandworm, on the other hand, is the one that's been most visible, I would say, in terms of high impact campaigns. And when you mentioned Hermetic Wiper, yeah, that was not as sophisticated compared to, for example, with Caddy Wiper, which was one of the most advanced wipers that we've seen. For example, it was abusing one of the drivers by a legitimate piece of disk partition software. So their techniques were quite sophisticated. So we see various levels of malware, which could suggest potentially that there are different teams with different levels of expertise behind these attacks.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the coordination, is that something that we've sort of seen? Typically, we sort of tend to categorize them into different groups. I think we're tracking 9 or 10 groups in sort of active in Russian-speaking languages in that region and in adjacent regions. But is it sort of normal to see them working together? Do you think they're being coordinated?
I would say it's quite rare, but occasionally we do see indicators of them cooperating. A good example of that is Gamaredon, for example. So we see them using primarily the Pteroda malware for the early phases of the attacks, for reconnaissance and so on, and then eventually for those targets of particular interest, then they would switch to Invisimol, which provides them with extended functionality to either spy or to disrupt the operations of that particular target.
So I know sort of going towards Indestroyer, and obviously that's the sort of the most fresh attack, let's say, and great news that along with CERT Ukraine guys and Microsoft's interaction, we've seen that we were able to really kind of prevent that spreading and becoming a very destructive attack. But in terms of these types of attacks, is this sort of limited to Ukraine? I mean, it's the same sort of technology. It's used in a lot of power generation stations around the world, not only in Ukraine, right?
Yeah, a lot of these industrial hardware is used in power grids all over the world. And with Indestroyer, the one of its strong points is its modular framework. So the attackers would easily be able to just add other plugins for other protocols like Modbus or any other protocol that could be perhaps more widespread or more widely used in other regions of the world. So this is definitely something to keep an eye out for. What's interesting is that there are only a handful of malware that were specifically targeting industrial systems, and in the week that we discovered Indestroyer, there was another one called InController that according to public knowledge, has not been actually deployed anywhere. But that actually goes after Schneider Electric and PLCs. So again, some very, very alarming potential capability there. So that was quite surprising, I would say, to in 1 week, since we have, including these two, only about 7, I think, pieces of malware that are targeting industrial systems, to discover 2 in the same week. So that was very interesting in our field.
Yeah, and we talked, you sort of said that we've sort of seen since the invasion on the 24th and right before with Hermetic, we've seen this incredible spike in the number of wipers and the differences in sophistication. But you also mentioned something quite interesting about the time that the preparation. So we have to remember that anyone who's involved in software, you don't write this stuff overnight. It doesn't just happen. So even the final compile date. Clearly, there's been testing, there's been evaluation, Q&A, the whole business behind actually creating the software, finding the vulnerabilities, and then testing and deploying. Have we really been able to see sort of any of that sort of testing phase going back, and where you sort of see, or are they kind of doing that live iteration, so the wipers kind of have a lot of the same components that we then see redeployed?
Well, I guess they were forced to come out with these different versions because we continue to detect all of them. So they're trying to slip by undetected. Fortunately, not very successful at that. So they're trying various versions, various variants, and yeah, they need to test them, of course, but. Again, this is speculation, but we can discuss about how good they are in preparing for these attacks. For example, as evidenced by some of the programming errors in the first version of Indestroy, for example, they most likely relied on some emulators of these industrial protocols, and I mean the impact of the malware is really depends on what's on the other side. What are those devices? What's the environment like? And that actually depends on what will be the effect, and that's really hard to I mean, the attackers typically attackers don't have a power plant at their disposal, and to be able to test these things beforehand, and that's probably also part of the reason why they sort of had that redundancy of all those 4 different communication protocols in place. In Industry 2, they did fix some mistakes. But again, that didn't help them much, so it didn't accomplish even that. So yeah, it's good news that defenders are better prepared all the time.
Yeah, I mean, sort of in terms of the sort of deployment, clearly it was really well planned. It was Hermetic Wiper, and then obviously didn't have time to mention everything. But as soon as we saw the certificate revocation of Hermetic Wiper, they deployed Isaac Wiper kind of immediately. So, and Isaac Wiper had even older compile dates and even older certificates and so on. So I guess there was a lot of pre-planning into this. And so, given that there was obviously a pre-plan, there was some coordination, they had some known dates, they have timing for deployment. What kind of surprised you the most in the end about some of these wipers, or what surprised you the most about Indestroyer 2?
With Indestroyer 2, when we found it, I would say the most surprising thing was that we only found it we only saw it the first time after over 5 years. That was not deployed earlier. So that was actually like one of the most puzzling things about it. Like there were also in the industry various speculation that whether it was Industry was a test of some sorts of like, and considering the large contrast between the attempted impact and what it actually caused, and the capability of the malware and its effect. It was actually surprising that we didn't see it again until now. So apparently they were keeping it, ready for use at a specific time.
Great, Robert. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for the great answers to the questions.
Okay, so my name is Juraj Janošík. I'm a leader of a team in ESET who is responsible for automated threat detection and incorporating of machine learning technologies in the product portfolio and as well into the backend infrastructure. So let me start with a bit of terminology. First of all, the terms artificial intelligence and machine learning are often wrongly, I would say, used interchangeably. I do it myself. I hate myself for that. I do it as well. So, but in ESET, we under artificial intelligence really understand the more general concept. When intelligent machine can learn and make decisions absolutely independently and autonomously based on the inputs from the environment and actually act without any human supervision. But actually, this is something that doesn't exist really right now, right? It's more from something for sci-fi movies. However, what is used right now is the machine learning. The field of computer science that gives machines the ability to find patterns in the vast amount of data. So someone in the field of artificial intelligence and machine learning would say that the true distinction between these two things is what is said in this joke, that really when something is written in Python, then it's machine learning, and when it's in PowerPoint, then it's definitely an AI. So where the idea comes from? It's from 1950s, where the first mathematical background for the what we used to call right now neural networks originate from. Then in 2000s, still the machine learning really looked like this. It was more of a mathematics that was really neat to deep dive to understand it. All the tools available for the engineers were only starting. And when you want to use it in your product, you really need to work hard in order to use it. Later, or nowadays, deploying the machine learning model and do machine learning is like really simple. The tools that are available from the big companies like Microsoft or Google are actually allowing anybody without any background knowledge of machine learning, scientific mathematics models, anything, do it for whatever purpose. Machine learning and artificial intelligence kind of is everywhere around us, impacting, influencing, improving our lives and society every day. There is many different areas of scientific research and progress where the machine learning is used right now, and it's really hard to keep up with this real progress. And everybody have machine learning algorithms right now with him carrying on in the mobile phone, and many of these uses that we never know about, wherever it is, it's sometimes very important for our lives. And there is also no limitations on the bad actors using these tools today, and likely utilizing them also in the future will be much more. But in the realm of cybersecurity, the situation is a little bit more complicated. Some of the post-truth cybersecurity vendors, as we like to call them, or these next-gen companies, present machine learning as some kind of silver bullet to all the cybersecurity-related issues, and they usually start with their marketing materials with a lot of preposterous claims like, you don't need to unpack any binary, you don't need to deobfuscate, emulate samples or anything like that. Just by doing some machine learning, you will easily say that something is malicious or clean without any problems. Well, we dare oppose to these claims. We think that our expertise, which is more than 30 years in the cybersecurity, is proving that there are any unicorns in the machine learning, and that regular updates accompanied with other cybersecurity techniques is what is needed in order to provide something that could be really called an next-gen security. So how it is in ESET? What is our approach in this? Well, quickly looking at the historical and technological stack of ESET. From the early days of the company, more than 30 years ago, we already tried to accompany it in the time when it was really hard. All these new approaches like neural networks in our product and also in our research. And in 1998, we already have the neural network as a part of our endpoint scanner. So it was much more before anybody was claiming any next-gen approach. Then, in 2005, we came up with something which we call DNA detections, which is in current terms something called online machine learning. I will mention it later because it's really important for what we are doing right now. Then, during those times when the rise of the samples that we saw in the wild was from few thousand going up to the hundreds of thousands every day. You need to find really smartly and clever ideas of how to deal with that. We start to use a lot of clustering algorithms and all these things on the back end, and also machine learning approaches to help alleviate our detection and research stuff, and really focus on the interesting things from the vastly amount. And then later in the 2017, we start with the deployment of module, which was specifically designed using all the machine learning technologies that were available, that we think that are actually fine to use in the scanner on the endpoints, and it's deployed on every endpoint that we have. So why we do that? Basically, from the beginning of the ESET, when ESET was a garage company, actually, we had the approach the cybersecurity. We need to approach the cybersecurity smartly rather than brute force, because we don't have so much employees that other veterans on the market already have. So it was this kind of environment that pushes us toward smart automation and machine learning, although it was not called that in the times, and force us to develop clever approach, collect data, and pick the important data and finding the needle in the haystack, actually. So years ago, the limitations in utilizing machine learning algorithms has been the huge cost of specific hardware and load on the software engineers. That was like the main problem. But in recent years, with the inception of big data and the drop of the cost of specific hardware, the GPUs, that was the crucial thing when the rapid adoption of machine learning started. For us, this was great because it helped us to improve the things that we already have and build inside of our lab. Machine learning itself are on the rise right now still. Academic papers describing new approaches are going out every day. And innovative ways on the machine learning are emerging also every day. And frameworks like TensorFlow or Scikit-learn or Azure, they're available to every developer. For us, that's a good opportunity. We can check all kinds of algorithms, try it on our data, and see what works and what works not. And last but not least, the important thing when you are considering to build any machine learning solution or support your solution with machine learning is the data, and to have the understanding of the data. Our database consists of hundreds of terabytes of samples, but not only the amount is the important thing. The important thing is that you understand the data, you have metadata collected and associated with them, you have the intelligence from the people which are working on the research analysis, and this is altogether what will help you to train and actually build a model that is useful and could be well-performing. However, as I mentioned before, this kind of post-truth security vendors present machine learning technology as a kind of a myth, like a silver bullet, and that could solve everything. And basically, this is not true. And not even the newest machine learning algorithm solely itself wouldn't solve the cybersecurity. Why this so? Well, they usually claim that you can decide whether some kind of sample or binary it's a malware without running itself, just by doing math, right? However, this was opposed with the famous mathematician and cryptoanalyst Alan Turing during the Second World War, and when he cracked down the Nazi Enigma code, that this isn't possible. Even a flawless machine wouldn't always be able to decide whether future unknown input wouldn't lead to unwanted behavior. What this means is that also you can end up in an indefinite loop. For machine learning, this means that just by doing this, you are not able to decide on whether any input could lead to something bad without running it. Other claim that is really popular is that machine learning is not enough, right? So let's do deep learning, because that's better. But again, that's the same, repeating the same mistake. Like, you are not relying on some older machine learning algorithm, but you are using deep learning. It's still the same. It's still the same fallacy. Also, in order to use machine learning effectively, a lot of samples is needed. If you want to do a classification algorithm, you need to have a lot of data. But it's not only about the amount of data, but in order to train a model that will be performing well, you need to have a right balance in your data sets. You need to have a data set that is labeled in the correct way, so you know what is clean, what is malicious in the cybersec. So either way, you end up with a buggy model which is not able to predict what is actually happening. This is something that is common thing and common mistake in a lot of academic papers. Like, the academia is trying to use those approaches in the cybersec, and they always end up with models which are not performing well because they don't have the data and they lack the domain knowledge, like the understanding of the threat landscape. And this is actually true also for a lot of vendors. Another thing is that the adversary here is intelligent. On one hand, you can see that a lot of companies are presenting that, well, the machine learning and artificial intelligence is great because it could beat people in chess or Go or whatever. But think about it. The thing is that these games have some rules. And the machine learning could learn that there are some boundaries which are described by this rule. But in cybersecurity, in this complex environment, there are no rules. The adversaries and the bad guys could do whatever they want and completely change the entire playing field. So in this environment, the machine learning has its limits. Obviously, from the picture, you can see that this is a false positive, right? And cybercriminals are known to work hard to avoid detection. They use their skills to hide the true purpose of their code by covering it with obfuscation and encryption and so on. So while understanding, while missing a malicious sample pose a problem, also false positives pose a problem. Generally, with machine learning algorithms and machine learning models, the number of false positives is higher. And what is usually is taken as a countermeasure with regular administrators is that either they keep the settings strict, and the daily work could be like more painful, and a lot of FPs are coming out, so there is a lot of work, and you need to take care of it, or you can lose the protective setup, which can reduce the detection, but also the capability of detection and potentially create new vulnerabilities. And as in real life, when you think that you are pregnant, you at least double check or ask for second opinion from a professional, right? So here is the same. Like there is already numerous white papers describing attack techniques on common machine learning algorithms. That's why our design that we came up is a combination of various algorithms, various approaches of machine learning. But not only that, still the presence of the human's expertise is absolutely crucial. So how will this work in our multi-layered protection, as we call it? So this is a description of various technologies that we have present on every endpoint to protect it. Those in the yellow square are technologies which are especially dedicated and are involved or using the machine learning technologies. And they are communicating with each other and supporting the other parts of it. So, but these three are the main holders of the machine learning capabilities. So how it works? I will quickly go through it. I don't want to go much into detail, but it's very important. So formerly, those AV signatures that these next-gen vendors hate so much, we never use that. We have this unique technology where we basically transform the full sample into the form which is more amenable or more suitable for comparing and detection. And we call it DNA. So for every sample, we create this DNA. And by precisely selecting parts of the DNA, these genes, as we call them, we create something which is called DNA detection. This DNA detection could be automatic or could be created by human detection engineers. And we have this technology since 2005. So this was much more before, again, than anybody was claiming that this is some next gen. And why this is kind of a machine learning approach? It's because this DNA detection is not static. It's kind of, to make it simple, it's like kind of algorithm that is deployed and to every client. And together it creates a model which is able to find new variants and kind of adapt to new samples. And so how it works? This is a graph which shows Q-bots detection in some specific period between 2019 and 2021. So the green turquoise graph represents all the unique detections, and the pink one or the present one specific DNA detection that was created somewhere around 2019 and was still this day still able to cover a lot of these new variants. So that's how this system is effective, still today. But maybe you will say, okay, so this is some your data. Maybe something much more better will be the way how to prove it. So thanks to the Conti leak that happened right after the war in Ukraine started, we have been able to look from the other side how this is effective. This is actually the graph that represents the tree-bot detection during the during the summer 2020. And what we found in the communication that was leaked from the Conti is that the guys have a really problem to overcome this detection. They mention it specifically, and they say that others that are not that scary. Before in the communication, they were referring to other antivirus companies. So based on that, based on these DNA detection, we built later something which is really using a lot of currently available machine learning algorithms, is combining like classical approaches, support vector machines, tree algorithms, boosted trees algorithms, and so on, with deep learning, neural networks, transformers, and so on. So the input is those DNA genes that I showed before. They are run through all these models. At the end, there is one neural network which stands for a consolidation. So there will be one output which will set or give us the clue to the scanner or to the guys in the lab whether something is with some probability malicious or clean. So this is what we do. Also in this approach is on every endpoint. This model is trained and is deployed on every endpoint. That's really important to say because this is not residing in the cloud. It was really hard to do that because you need to think about the performance, about the size, because it will be on the devices, mobile phones, notebooks, laptops, everything. So this needs to be taken in consideration when creating such a model. But of course, we have models which are much more bigger. So in order to use those, they are residing in the cloud. And on the request from the client, they are used. And not only that, because as I said before, the machine learning is not enough solely. So in cloud, we have much more powerful technologies like advanced unpacking, which is used on the request from the client when we spot some complicated protector or packer which couldn't be overcome on the sandbox which is on the machine. So we hand it over to the cloud and process it there. Also, there are much more bigger models which couldn't be fed into the endpoint. And also, there is a huge part which stands for our cloud sandbox, which is actually real machines which are executing the stuff, and we are monitoring what is happening inside. So, and finally, the answer back to the endpoint could be synchronously or asynchronously whether the thing is malicious or clean, and the endpoint could then decide what to do with that. These approaches that I mentioned before was mainly supervised. Supervised machine learning means that before you have a train set which is correct, which is labeled, so clean samples, malicious samples, and you are trying to train model which could distinguish between those. Also, there are other approaches in machine learning, like unsupervised learning, when you when you let the algorithm to learn these things on its own. And we were thinking, like, how can we use it? It's obviously something that will cause a lot of FPs. So we find other place when it will actually help us, and that's UFI detection. So we have a unique UFI scanner, which is incorporated in every other endpoint, and from those we get a lot of UFI samples. It's millions every month. So it's basically not able to process by humans, but what we can do is that we start to cluster it and use the unsupervised learning techniques to find the outliers, and those outliers are then hand over to human researchers. This is kind of like early warning system, and it actually works. It helps us to find the first UFI rootkit logchecks, and also thanks to this automated approach, well, we have been able to uncover a lot of UFI firmware backdoors and other additional vulnerabilities, and work with major hardware suppliers to fix them. Okay, what it's for us as machine learning engineers, really huge playing field for a lot of machine learning algorithms is the EDR and XDR environment. The bunch of improvements that could be done there is obviously huge. The environment is much more complex than just the regular endpoint, because we are looking on the whole network, and the ideas come from itself, right? There is anomaly detection that could be used. There is baselining, so you learn what's the standard user behavior or what's the standard behavior in their environment. And based on that, you can look on the deviations, what happens, and this could pose, again, as some kind of early warning system. Sequential processing of events in time, because this is happening in like some time, a kind of time series, because when you are evaluating things on the endpoint, this is usually something static, like a sample. So, but this is much more different. So, also classification methods could be used here, like typically those that we use on the endpoint, but it's much more complex because you know, the EDR and XDR environment pose a lot of challenges. There is much more data, and the amount of alarms or incidents that you can throw against administrator personnel is much more higher. And if your company don't have like a specific security staff or SOC, the amount of work that needs to be done to handle such EDR could be tremendous. But that's where the machine learning could help. But still, there are some kind of limitations. Okay, so let's continue. Let's continue. So this is our like complete design. What we have, the center is the endpoint with all the protection layers. Then we have the ESET Inspect, which is our EDR. Again, we are trying to incorporate some machine learning technologies. Already some of them are there. But again, just simply doing machine learning or putting it everywhere is not enough. Again, when you look up, what we value the most and what is still important here is that is the part of the human expertise. That's the key. Okay, but this sounds like machine learning is here only for the defenders, but the thing actually is that why also adversaries couldn't use it, right? So there are many ways how cyber attackers can utilize the machine learning based technologies on their own benefit. So let's look what are the areas. So obviously, what is already happening right now, and no machine learning needs to be there, is creating a new malware. Reinventing and improving previously by automation, generating new variants from the older variants. This is all happening right now. But we think and we anticipate that with more adoption of machine learning in these processes which bad guys are doing, the rise and the amount of the new and better, actually, malware would be going up. Also creating a malicious spam. Like years before, the spam was usually a lot of clumsy, especially in the local languages. But right now, thanks to the improvements of translation algorithms and NLP processing, also the spam improves. And you don't need to speak the language in order to create a phishing or spam that will be in perfect language shape. This is again already happening right now, and we anticipate that it will be much more. Also, one of the things that we are using machine learning to protect ourselves, right? Why also the bad guys couldn't do that? They could introduce these mechanisms to find better ways how to spot that somebody is trying to deploy a honeypot or research how the botnet is operating, so they could do a countermeasures. Also, they could identify like red flags that could give away the malware's intentions, and also improve the self-destruct mechanism, or mimic the patterns of the regular and clean traffic in order to hide the malicious traffic. So we already thought that we spot something like that in the Emotet, and it was complicated to track. It was complicated to communicate with the CNC and get all the stuff when we were doing the research. It was more of like a cat and mouse game during the botnet tracking. And we actually believe that those people behind the emotet was already using some machine learning algorithms to pick the targets, and the operators behind were using these techniques. But as you can see, when the Ukrainian police busted those operators, this was actually how their infrastructure looked like. So not much machine learning right there. But well, still, emotet is back. It's pretty nasty malware. So maybe this time they will do better. Also, where machine learning in future in this area will have might support the increase of the speed of the attack, which can be crucial, especially in cases as data theft. So if you have an algorithm, if the bad guys could come up with an algorithm that could perform the extraction of targeted data, find the right data which should be extracted, this will be something which will be hard to overcome, which will be hard to prevent, and again speed up of the exfiltration of the data might prevent us from detecting, or making it harder to detect. And as I mentioned before, like in the emotet case, they were already trying to target the other additional modules on the specific people by collecting the telemetry and evaluating the telemetry. But again, if you harvest a lot of telemetry, then with all these, with the adoption of the machine learning, you can do that better. One thing that is already happening with the assistance of machine learning is finding of the new zero-day vulnerabilities. So this technique is called fuzzing. So it's like providing the algorithm with the invalid, unexpected, or basically a random input, and we are trying to figure out what works and what could lead to a unpredicted behavior, and hence you can identify a zero-day or basically an exploit. This is something which is really valuable and precious for the attackers. And currently, for like the good use, the fuzzing is equipped or being equipped with the machine learning to speed this process up. So there is no way why in future or recent years the bad guys will also not do that, right? So when we look what Microsoft and Google is doing right now, Google actually claims that in 2019 they have been able, thanks to the fuzzing equipped with machine learning, find more than 20,000 vulnerabilities in their environment. So the tools are there. You just need to use them. Other realm, which has been from the start riddled with trouble, is the IoT. So the number of the devices, such as routers, security cameras, various sensors, is growing extremely fast. And however, the security is notoriously lacking and known to being susceptible to most primitive exploitation techniques, such as brute force of default credentials and misuse of years-old vulnerabilities. So all of these things will probably get much more worse because, as I said before, the fuzzing here will be much more faster thanks to the machine learning. In IoT, the devices are much more simpler, so you don't need to process so much code, and with the clever automation, you can find new zero days extremely quickly. And IoT devices generally present an ideal platform for amazing large quantities of legitimate traffic information and user habits, which can be used and trained machine learning models designed to stealth or make the malicious activity invisible. So, but not all the outlooks here are so grim. Actually, it seems that the bright future is already here. According to the Consumer Technology Association, 4 years back, more than half of all applications of machine learning has been actually used to improve the security. So that's kind of interesting. The other thing is that how many of those applications were actually good. And other research organization, Meticulous, is anticipating that at the end of the decade, the field of cybersecurity alone, the machine learning part of it, will be worth more than $60 billion. So surely, this is a huge financial gain. Maybe also there will be some security value, right? But we need to be vigilant. We need to question what the vendors are saying to us, if they really understand the limitations of the machine learning. You might be said that, okay, I'm standing here, I'm principal machine learning something, but I'm more of a, and I should be maybe an advocate of the machine learning, but I'm more of a machine learning realist than machine learning utopist. And I'm aware that there is a lot of limitations, and we need to think twice where to use machine learning, how to use it. We need to understand the limitations and questions their use. So thank you very much.
So thank you, Uri. Just join me for a couple of questions. So really like interesting talk, and I think fresh kind of take on some of the things that we hear about, and I think many people will obviously have heard about AI and talking about AI, but it's nice to hear what it really means. But I think it is a very important consideration to understand what the limitations really are of that. So you mentioned in the talk that there are some challenges in applying AI to EDR specifically or XDR. So what do you mean by this specific challenges in this case?
In the XDR environment, the challenges mainly are about the amount of the data. When you imagine that in order to provide a good estimate what is happening on the machine, you need to monitor all the events, and boils down to like tens events per second from one machine. So if you imagine a company with tens of thousands of endpoints, that is a huge amount, and it's in the real time. So that's the difference from the endpoint where you just have one sample and you can do dynamic static analysis, whatever. But in XDR and EDR, these things are happening in the real time. So that's one of the challenges. And second, maybe more important, is the privacy, because when you are looking on the sample, well, that's just the sample. But in the XDR, you are looking on the whole network. You are processing the network traffic, everything that could be passwords, that could be some personal things. So the trust between the vendor and the client needs to go much higher. So these are the mainly challenges.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into so my second question is that as a vendor, talk about that trust relationship, but we're obviously handling huge amounts of data to train the systems, to look at them, and it's inevitably some of that data, if it was misused, could be linked back to sort of expose privacy or expose personal information and so on. So how do you sort of solve the security side of that? What are the things that we would put in place to make sure that that privacy thing doesn't happen that you're talking about?
Yes. You mentioned it. So we are a security vendor, so the trust between us and the client is absolutely crucial. So all the data that are mentioned for the training are securely stored. They are encrypted. All the communication between the endpoints protected with ESET and the backend is encrypted. All the data are stored on our servers, so we are not using any Azure, Amazon, whatever. It's everything is our hardware in our data centers, and also the people which are allowed to work with them are going through several trainings, and not everybody in ESET actually have access to it. Also, not everybody in the virus lab has access to it, and we never sell any data to third parties, and we never share any data with the first parties, except the law enforcement when we do any kind of investigation. So that's the only exception.
Yeah. So in terms of the sort of the way it works, obviously we've got that data, we're securing it, we're making sure that we're not exposing that to anything, but then you also sort of need to use it. And it's a huge amount of data. You mentioned hundreds of terabytes. So compared to sort of other machine learning models like GPT, how big would be the models that you're actually talking about?
Okay, so that's a good question. Well, the GPT, I don't know if you are familiar with that. That's a natural language processing model, famous one from Google. And it's huge. It's based on neural networks and deep learning. We kind of use the same approach for processing of sequential data, by the way. But the GPT is enormous in the number of parameters. That's the kind of metric which is used in the machine learning. So it's in the matter of billions, like 3 or 4 billions. Our models, like in the scale of hundreds of thousands of these features, which is obviously much more less, but size doesn't matter here, right? Because it's about what the model can do. It doesn't necessarily mean that when you have a huge model, it's a good model. That doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm. And so the other thing that, just to talk about briefly, we used to talk about heuristics and behavior analysis. So how does machine learning kind of factor into behavior analysis? Are they the same thing? What are sort of differences? And does the sort of the machine learning aspect of it kind of support the behavioral analysis that we are doing?
Yes, it does. We do that. So for example, kind of the behavioral analysis is also happening on our endpoint. So it's running the sample in a small sandbox, and one of the output is like the stream of what actually happened during the execution, and we fed this to a sequential processing model. That's the model which is similar to what Google is using for the natural language processing. We are using basically the same approach, but the distinction is that we need to completely recode it because we couldn't use basically the same. The Google model is used for natural language. We use it for API calls and so on, and also the size. The size matters here because you need to have it as much smaller. Yeah, that's weird, but you want to have it smaller because you are deploying it on the mobile phones. You are deploying on the endpoints, and the performance impact is something that we really care about a lot. So smaller model, but with good performance. That's our key here.
So great, thank you very much. I have one final question. Are you at all worried about the future of cybersecurity, that an AI might replace you in your job?
No.
Okay.
I don't think that this will happen in my lifetime.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you for sticking here with me. I know it has been a long day, a lot of information to take in. So what I'm going to talk about today here is going to be the threat landscape, as we call it. I don't see my presentation still on the slides. So I guess we have to wait for the director to say it's up there. Okay. And what I'm going to talk about is the threats as we see them in our data. So I'm going to actually wrap up the whole day because I'm going to reference to almost every speaker that talked today. And I'm going to base everything on the data that we have in our threat report. So that's every 4 months we take all the data and crunch it and do a nice report, wrap it in nice graphics, and provide all the information, all the intelligence that we can publicly make available to everybody. And in this threat report, we have a lot of categories, data, APT reports. So I'm going to go through some of those interesting points so that you have an idea what you can find there. And maybe I will inspire to go to our website, Ufi Security, and download the copy for yourself. My name is Ondrej Kubovic, as already said by Andy, and I work in Virus Lab as a security awareness specialist. That means I'm trying to translate everything that our guys are doing from the technical into human realm, so it's more understandable for everybody. So let's dive in into how the report looks. This is like the overview of all the categories that we have there. And I'm going to start with the Apt Group Activity, because this is a section where we are always reporting on the latest findings of our threat analysts who are monitoring specific groups. And the one that I'm going to show you, first one that I'm going to show you, is Oil Rig. Oil Rig is a well-known threat actor. I need to use my cheat sheet again. APT33, lithium or Siamese kitten. That's all the names that the cybersecurity industry is using. That's a very good use from our side. That we have always 10 names for each group, so it's easy to orientate yourself. And they have been active since 2014. They are believed to be based in Iran, and they are targeting victims around the Middle East, so different countries in Middle East. One very recent campaign that they were involved in was called Out to Sea. It's really small down there. And they have been using different backdoors to run the campaign. Mostly it was the Den bot, but what I'm going to talk about is mostly the last one, the one in purple called Marlin. And Marlin was different to all of the previous backdoors because it changed the way it communicated with the attackers, with the CNC, with the servers. It switched from DNS and HTTP and HTTPS to using OneDrive API. So a different way how to connect to the servers and ask for the commands from the owners or the operators of the malware. What they were targeting mostly were victims in these three areas, so medical, technology, and diplomatic organizations, and it was in Israel, Tunisia, and United Arab Emirates. How they were doing it, mostly they were trying to infect the victim through spear phishing, and if they were able to get inside, so they persuaded the victim to click on something, they would download and install some remote access tool, typically TeamViewer, very popular tool in the, not just in the security industry, but also in the IT as a whole. And when they have that access, then they can do all sort of havoc in the network. So what I mean by that, they are looking for sensitive data. So it can be passwords or credentials that are stored in Chrome because they have a tool to dump those passwords. They were using Mimikatz to hunt for passwords, keylogging, because they were also trying to look at what the victim was typing. And also, when they were already able to get into some systems, they were looking for sensitive, interesting data that they could exfiltrate. And if, of course, when you are already in the network, why wouldn't you look around and find something more interesting that you could steal, you could actually use for your own good? So lateral movement, to do this, to like move in the network, they used a tool, SMB tool, that was based on the Eternal Blue exploit, which is a known NSA tool that has been leaked to the internet and used, for example, in the WannaCry infection in 2017. Another APT group that we have been reporting on in our report, in the threat report in the last year, were the Dukes. Again, a very well-known group. If it doesn't ring a bell for you, then maybe APT29, Cozy Bear, Nobelium, some of those names might work. And if it still doesn't work, maybe the attack on the DNC in the United States or attacks connected to the SolarWinds compromise. All of those were done by the Dukes, so they are quite known in the industry as well as by the victims, I guess. In T2, we have seen a spear phishing campaign. They are really good in social engineering. They were pretending to be from a Belgian embassy, saying that the embassy is closing, not stating which country or whatever, like closer information. But if you want the closer information, then you have to go to the attached HTML file. Of course, the HTML file is not just a benign thing where you get some information, but it also contains it will download an ISO file. This is a disk image file. And in the end, you will get infected by one of the, it contains like 3 different files, one DLL, one LNK, and one decoy document. You were looking for information, so there's a decoy document where you don't get much information, but still it looks legitimate to you. But in the back, the DLL is run, and Cobalt Strike is installed. This is a, if you don't know what it is, it's a red team tool. So pen testers are using this to get inside networks they are testing, they want to penetrate. And it's a go-to tool for the dukes. So they really like this, and they like to use it to get into the networks of their victims. That was in T2. If you don't know what T stands for, it's January till April, May till August, and September till December. So we have always this 4-month period. So T3, that's the last 4 months of 2021. Another campaign that was run by the Dukes. This time they were pretending to be from Iran, Iranian embassy, and saying that due to COVID infections, they have to close the embassy. Again, additional information is in the attached HTML, so similar tactics. Again, this time there was this ISO disk file, but in the end, not a DLL or LNK was downloaded, but a covid.hta file was downloaded and run. This is a file that can contain JavaScript, or it can contain JavaScript or VBS script. Sorry, and in the end, it would run a PowerShell script and install again Cobalt Strike. As we have seen more of these emails, this is just one example. There were different payloads they were trying to use. Even the ISO file doesn't have to be always ISO. Sometimes they use different file types that are also used as disk images, so VHDX. And then in the end, it will always end by the Cobalt Strike infection. So that was the second campaign. Oh, also, the APT groups like to look at the news. Because in the news, sometimes you can find very interesting information. For example, you can see what the new vulnerabilities have been found. And sometimes they even find the vulnerabilities before everybody else and start using them. And based on that, we will have to patch something. That was exactly the case for Proxy Logon. Probably most of you who work in IT have heard this name. Proxy Logon is a chain of vulnerabilities in MS Exchange servers. You can use it, if you use it right, to take complete control over the MS Exchange, install malware, sniff on the traffic or emails that are being sent, or use it for sending other emails. So it gives you complete control, which is quite interesting in an organization where most of the information is flowing through MS Exchange through the emails, actually. The information, or the number that the media have been reporting, was that around 60,000 victims were around the world. Of course, our telemetry is not as big as this, so we cannot confirm this number exactly, but what we can say that we have been monitoring it. We have seen quite a few groups that were misusing the vulnerability of Proxy Logon. The first ones were Hafnium. There were the report says that they were first time seen using this vulnerability in the wild on January 3rd. 2 days later, Orange Tsai, which is a known researcher, has reported the information, reported the vulnerability chain to Microsoft. It took them almost 2 months to fix the issue. I mean, it's not easy to fix it, and you cannot break things on the way because MS Exchange servers are quite important. So in the time till they got to releasing the patch, there were other groups trying to already misuse it, and as Hafnium already figured it out, the other groups were not far behind. So before the patch was released, there were at least 5 other groups already using it for their own benefit. And as you can imagine, if it's publicly known, not everybody can patch right away. So it took only 1 day for mass exploitation of this vulnerability chain. According to our data, so our telemetry, which is kind of limited because you don't see all the computers in the world, we only see our clients. But we can say that we have seen 5,500 email servers being targeted in 115 countries, which is quite an astonishing number. If you take it, 5,500 can be organizations, each one with 1 server. So it's a lot of targets, a lot of victims that can be targeted by this. And there were a lot of groups that were misusing it. If I leave the Hafnium out, because that's the one that was really back there in January, we found 11 names that were already misusing it on like the first days of March. And what is interesting, it was already mentioned in one presentation before this one, and that's the famous Sparrow. That's the analysis that the NCSC was referencing to all the time, and that's also a group that was trying to plant backdoors inside those MS Exchange servers. So that was added in September. Everything else we have seen actually in the first days of March. another vulnerability chain, very similar. It's almost the sibling to proxy logon, but far less exploited than proxy logon. Has been found by, again, Orange Sai. This guy seems to be really focused on MS Exchange. And he reported it during the summer months in the northern hemisphere, so that everybody is fine with that. And as you can see, the most targeted regions were Germany and United States, so they know where these valuable targets are for them. Again, we have been looking at different groups trying to misuse it. Some of the names are quite famous. TA410, TA428 are known groups. Sparking Goblin and Red Foxtrot, a little bit maybe less. What is interesting, there was also this application update cluster. It's a APT group that these attacks were all similar to each other, but we cannot attribute it to any known group that we are monitoring, and we didn't find anybody else monitoring a group that was behaving like this. So for us, it's hard to say what it is. So we named it only application update cluster. Maybe in the future, when somebody finds a new group, we will find that there is a similar behavior and we can attribute it later on. This cluster was mostly targeting, again, my cheat sheet, healthcare sector, construction, engineering companies, and local administrations. So they were quite broadly targeted. What is interesting also with proxy logon and proxy shell is that the APT groups were snatching the servers from each other. Because if they didn't close the vulnerability, it was still open to exploitation. So sometimes some organizations were compromised even 2 or 3 times. And we don't know if the groups were cooperating or trying to steal exchanges from each other. But yeah, nobody knows that because we don't see into the heads of the APT groups. OK, so that's for the APT part. So that's a taste of what kind of information we have there on the APT section. And now we are going to jump into the Crimeware part. And I moved 4 slides to the front. Yep. And I'm going to jump to not even this one, even more. OK. This is going crazy. Not sure if I'm the one doing it or somebody else is controlling this. So I'm going to go into the data looking at the global overview. So the amount of malware that we have detected in our telemetry in the 2021 in each of the thirds of the year. As you can see, the last part of the year is quite busy. It grew by 7.2%. It doesn't seem like much, but these are numbers in hundreds of millions. So the numbers, if they grow even by 1%, it can be in absolute numbers quite interesting. And what's not even accounted for in this graph is the attacks on RDP, so remote desktop protocol, remote access to the computers. I'm going to get to that in the next section. If we look at the top 10 detections, I believe if you look at the names, you don't get that much information. The reason is many of those detections are generic. So we are catching a lot of threats by using one type of detection that has commonalities. Euro was talking about something like that called DNA detection. So this is kind of what it does to the telemetry. So for example, HTML phishing agent is any threat that is an HTML typically coming through email, and it's a HTML code in that email that will redirect you to a website where your credentials are being stolen. As you can imagine, this description fits like millions of attacks, so that's why we have it up there. And as you can see, it's almost 20% of all the detections that we have seen in the last 4 months of 2021. The second one, the exploit from 2017, it's a exploit misusing vulnerability in Microsoft Equation Editor. It's a part of Microsoft Office package. It has actually, I think, even been discarded. It's not being used anymore, and the attackers are still targeting it and trying to misuse it to gain access. So it's quite interesting that the old vulnerabilities are still alive and kicking, and the attackers know this and are using it. One thing that I would point your attention to is the VBA Trojan downloader agent. These are VBA macros, Visual Basic for applications. These are macros in your Microsoft Office document. So if you download the attachment and click Enable Macros, this is going to be the detection if it's malicious. What's interesting about it, it's 3.4%. It's not much, right? But the last maybe year and a half, even 2 years, this was the top detection and was accounting for 20–30% of all detections that we have seen. So what happened is that Emotet was taken down, and this was the primary user of this type of attack. And as soon as their servers went down, the botnet was taken down, the numbers just crumbled to this number. So went from 20 to 3.4% in our telemetry. And that only shows you how one threat can make a lot of difference in the threat landscape completely. As for geographic distribution, I'm just going to fly through this, and you might not see it that clearly, but the top country that has the detections in the 9.5% region is Japan. So they see probably the most attacks. I don't know if the reason is that they should be thought as more gullible in the emails or why they are targeting them the most, but that's what our telemetry says. They are followed by Spain, Turkey, Poland, and the United States, if you would be interested, because the shading is really close to each other. So that's the overview, the global view. And now zooming in on the exploits. And I'm jumping to the last section. It's not, I have a reason why I'm going there. Because that's one of the places where billions of attacks are happening every day, actually. Because if we were looking at the RDP attacks, the attacks on remote access to your computer, so you are working from home, you just type in your name and credentials, and you get to your machine that is sitting on the desk in your office. This is a quite nice target for the attackers, because if they are able to get in and elevate their rights to the admin, they have legitimate access to the network, and they have actually full visibility. They can go anywhere in the network and do whatever they want. So perfect thing for initial access. They can sell it. They can use it for themselves. It can be sold to ransomware gangs. There is a lot of money at stake in a moment when a RDP access has been exploited or the protection of password has been broken. What's interesting, you can see in T3, the numbers have exploded. So the number of malicious guesses to access those remote desktop protocols has shot up by 274%, which is an astonishing number, but wait till you see the absolute numbers behind that. But before I get there, is one more chart that I'm going to show you, and that's an update. So this is for T1. It's not even complete, as you can see. It's only half of April. And we see there is a lot of dropping. So the dark line in the top shows the unique machines that have been reporting this type of attack every day. And the number has been stagnant for quite a few months already. Now it's dropping, and it has dropped by almost a half, which is quite a big difference. So the question is, what's behind it? We know what was the biggest change in the geopolitics and in the world. And it seems that it has also affected this area. So the number of brute force attacks against RDP has plunged in T1. And after the invasion, it has just hit the rock bottom and stayed there. So it didn't improve since then. It can have different explanations why this is happening. But one is that Ukrainian servers might have been hacked and are now down. So they are not running anymore. And that's why they cannot attack anymore. The other one is that many of the attacks were run in this area. So there is not much to attack right now because they are down, they are not connected, or nobody's taking care of them and using them, so nobody's attacking them. And the third one is that the attackers don't have time because they have to do something else. So it's hard, again, we don't know which of these scenarios is right, but you can see that the numbers are clearly showing there is a decline. Most attacks, Western Europe, and in the Americas, you can see United States is the most targeted. So it doesn't seem to be the targets, one of the explanations. Now, for the absolute numbers, 29, 288, and 117, those are billions. So it's like crazy numbers. And at the end of 2020, we told like 30 billion attacks. It's so much, that's such a volume that they cannot go over that. Yeah, 10 times in the next year. And as you can see, even though they have dropped down, now we have seen 117 billion attacks until now. So in the first, not even full 4 months. One more thing in the exploit section was Log4j. You probably heard about this vulnerability. It has been reported on 10th of December. Our chart starts at 11th December. So only 1 day after when we had the detection out, there has been a steep increase in exploitation. The reason, and it has been already said in this during this event, if these vulnerabilities are severe, the attackers will try to misuse them because they give them a lot of space that they can use for their own ends. And this one got 10 out of 10 on the CVSS scale, so that's the perfect score. I don't even remember another one that had such a high score, such a high severity, sorry, a hard word for me. Log4j was a, if you don't know, it's a library in JavaScript, Java library, which is used for logging some activity. What is important is that it's an open source utility, and a lot of products and even other software have it built in. So for the IT defenders, it was most important to find this library in their systems and find out where it's hidden and to patch it. So that's what was happening till the Christmas or even the end of the year. And the numbers here, they were in together, if you count all the detections in our systems, were in millions. And it took only 1 day to just start exploitation. So a lot of APT groups and even ransomware gangs just jumped on the opportunity. If you look in the top 10 intrusion vectors, so that's the way, the most used external attacks against networks. If you look at those, Log4j is in the number 5 in the whole year 2021. It's in the 5th place with 5%, and it was out there only for, what, 20 days? So quite interesting that how big this thing has become only in a few days. And it's still out there, and still a lot of vulnerable machines still running unpatched Log4j, so they are still trying to misuse it. But the top choice for the attackers is still password guessing. And if you look MS Exchange, the first CVE, 26855, that's proxy logon. And there is another one closer to the bottom, that's the 34473, that's the proxy shell. So they both also made it to the top. Yeah, I don't know, it's not 10, I think it's top 12 here. So that's for exploits. So this type of information you can find there. We will also add information about the attacking servers in the RDP section, for example. So we have new data that will be added in this area. Okay, ransomware. Everybody's asking about the ransomware because this is the best topic for media, for everybody. It's understandable. You know you have been hacked. Peter Kruse was talking about it a lot today, how it looks. What's important to say, our telemetry is showing only detections of ransomware here and there. Why that happens is that we can stop ransomware at so many times before it attacks, before it's really deployed and starts encrypting your data, that we actually only see a few, maybe hundreds or thousands of detections throughout the one period. So there is not much ransomware to detect at that point because you stop it as the RDP attack, you stop it as some other type of network intrusion. You might have stopped it as the downloader that came into your inbox. So there is so many ways how to stop it that you don't even see the final payload of ransomware. And the last one, as you can see, there are quite a few spikes in the last 4 months. The last one is Rook. So those are the rookies that Peter Kruse has been naming today and describing how they attack. I even took out the landing page they have on dark web. So yeah, he stole everything from me at this point. One thing I can add, and he didn't mention, is that they are using, I wouldn't say they are amateurs because they know how to get into your network. They know how to encrypt you, how to extort you. But the thing is, they are using stolen ransom note from Sodinokibi or Revel, if you know them. So they are using somebody else's ransom note, and they are using a leaked source code of Babik ransomware, which is a defunct ransomware right now, but their source code is available. So they just took components from the internet, put it all together, meshed it up, and then went out to use it. So yeah, maybe rookies, but it seems they are getting better too. So not really good news. Looking at the top 10, again, the limitation here is quite clear. As you can see, we still see WannaCry as one of the most detected ransomware families. The reason for this is there is still a lot of unpatched networks out there that still run computers with eternal blue vulnerabilities exploited by the eternal blue. So it's a worm, it's living out there, and it's still doing some damage, but it's not really big numbers. Even if in the top 10, if you think it's thousands of detections around the world in 4 months, it's not going to be that much of a damage. But what's interesting, in the top 10, we sometimes even catch the big game hunters. So the ones that are targeting they are choosing their victims wisely and that are trying to double extort them. For example, Sodinokibi, Phobos is the same thing, and Logbit too. So even the big game hunters can be caught by antivirus. So this is something that they would claim ransomware cannot be caught by the old-time antivirus. It can. There are other new gangs that appeared on the scene. So despite all the law enforcement activity that we have seen, the last one, Hive, if you never heard of it, they are quite active. They had a few hundred victims in first months of their activity. The one that was probably most prominent was MediaMarkt. It's probably you know this company. They are selling electronics across Europe, and they have been asked for an outrageous ransom, $240 million. I would say this was a PR stunt because nobody was expecting that MediaMarkt is going to pay so much money just to get their servers up and running again, especially if they have some backups or something running in the background. So they were also willing to offer a lot of discounts, and they were haggling about the price. But as far as I know, MediaMarkt didn't pay it, and they had quite a big problem with Hive ransomware because they know what they do. What changed is that law enforcement started to be very, very active. So, for example, United States offered $20 million for information on Revel, or Sodinokibi, and Darkside gangs. And this led also to quite a lot of information, probably, that brought them a lot of information, and they were able to arrest a lot of people. Interpol had some actions. Europol had some actions. In the end, people from Dharma Ransomware, Megacortex, Locker-Goga, Clop, Revel affiliates were arrested, including the one that hacked Kaseya. So there were quite a lot of big busts. And the biggest one came in January. Again, you would not expect that Russian FSB is going to arrest somebody from the ransomware scene, but it seems that there was some information and pressure that forced them to do it, and ransomware gang Revel, core members of this gang, have been arrested. They have raided, I think, 25 different places in Russia to catch most of those people. It's more than a dozen that ended up in custody. It's not clear what happened to them, if this was a hiring process or if this was what happened with Revel gangs. They have been arrested, and there was a lot of cash, 20 luxury cars, a lot of money they had already extorted from their victims. Also, some of the good news, we always have a table with decrypted or decrypted ransomware strains, or those that closed shop, decided not to do anything anymore. So there were quite a few in this case. I'm going to jump to downloaders. Again, this is an interesting section because there has been quite a big difference between T1 and T2. That's the Emotet takedown. The last big spike that was caused by, that was the last big campaign by Emotet. After that, they were raided and everything taken apart. As you can see, that changed the whole landscape, and it took half of downloaders down. In T3, it came up again. The reason, Emotet has been resurrected. This is how the raid looked, and Juraj has already showed you a few of the hardware pieces they have been using to run this million-heavy botnet. And what is interesting about it, if you look at the numbers, this was the Emotet return in November, so 15th, 16th November. Then there was a December campaign, and one that was after it during Christmas, but there was not much action because people were not online. And now, if you take these numbers, when they started restarted the botnet in November and December, this is where they are today. So there have been new campaigns, and after that there was even a bigger one, and the increase is in more than 8,000%. So they are quite active right now, and it's interesting to see how they were able to return to the game and like fully flood everybody with their malware. And they are actually using new tactics, so they are installing also the Cobalt Strike beacon that was mentioned. One more thing that I'm going to mention before I close this presentation, and that's Android banking. That's Android malware in general. As you can see, there was not big change in T3, only 3% increase. But one thing that was interesting to see was that Android banking malware has been increasing throughout the year. At the end of the year, it fell by 20%, but there has been rapid increase in the beginning of the year, so the overall numbers were quite high. Actually, 428% increase in banking malware on Android. What is interesting for you to get a perspective is that this made the amount of banking malware, or banking malware became as prevalent as adware on Androids. And you can see the difference in the risk that adware is going to show you some pop-ups, and this is going to steal a lot of your personal information and can be quite dangerous. So I could not fit everything in this presentation because the report is quite extensive. There is a lot of other categories. So if you're interested in cryptocurrency threats, info stealers, web threats, email threats, there is a lot of information there. So I suggest you go to We Live Security and download your own copy. I can keep it up here. It's behind a QR code, so it's just scan it, click it. I see one mobile phone. Okay. A few more people. So. And there will be a new one, as you can imagine. So T1 will be closed this week. So next week we are starting to write another one. So there will be a lot of interesting information. As you have seen with the RDP, with Emotet, there is a lot of new data coming in. You can also find it on We Live Security. We have a section for it. Or you can read the research. Again, this is something that Robolipowski already mentioned. There is a lot of information there too. QR code, but I think you don't need that anymore. And that's it from my side. Thank you for your attention. And as this is the last presentation, I thank you.
So, thank you, Andre. Why don't you join me for a few questions before we go? So, interesting to keep seeing, the sort of development as different threats rise and fall over time, and see takedowns that happen, and then things get resurrected, or they move around, or they get recruited by different organizations.
It's almost a novel.
Yeah. So in one of the questions is probably let's talk about the sort of the other side of it. We've heard from NCSE today, and we sort of heard from Peter about sort of incident response. But one of the things we've talked about in the past on these sessions is the sort of the law enforcement aspect of it. So, have you seen the sort of the increase in the law enforcement requests for information and takedowns on affecting the ransomware space?
As you can see, that many of the high-profile ransomware gangs were even hit. So I would say the cooperation between private vendors and the law enforcement has improved immensely in the last 2 years. And what helped a lot was also the big cases such as the Colonial Pipeline and Kaseya, where a lot of victims in the United States were hit, which attracted attention from the administration, and then it started to turn the wheels also around the world. So right now there is a lot of attention on this problem, and the law enforcement agencies around the world are collecting data to get to these attackers, even offering to pay millions just for a piece of information. So it's really a change in the environment, and for the attackers, this is not really good news, and it's affecting them because you can see there are new players all the time, but still the old ones are either closing shop or being arrested. So it's quite interesting too.
So you sort of feel like it might be the kind of the dying days of the ransomware thing, or you think it's going to continue?
No, I wouldn't say it's dying days because it depends. Maybe they will move somewhere where, again, the authorities will not be crunching them that much or to be out of reach. That's one thing they can do. We didn't see decrease in the amateurish ransomware. So there are a lot of attackers who are just buying some piece of code or downloading something that's openly available and playing with it. And the ransomware, if it hits you, it's low quality, it destroys your data, you cannot decrypt it, but it's still there. It still happens, and it's a lot of cases, so we don't see a decline in that area. But the big game hunters, it seems that the environment has changed, and it's going to be harder for them to do it.
And when we're talking about Emotet, for instance, obviously that kind of got shut down. It was a big thing, and it really did make an effect on the environment. But obviously Europol at the time was saying that Emotet is extremely dangerous. There's a lot of problems that that they're causing. What do you sort of see in terms of their return? Does it look like the same, more of the same? Are they more or less dangerous? Are they more effective?
It seems that they are back with the full force. They have even improved the malware, so they have new commands, they have new modules they are using. So they did not rest on laurels because the core members of Emotet gang seem to be out there. So the people who were arrested were probably some admins who were running the network, but not really the core members developing the code. So if we look at that, yeah, they have still the full gang to run the Emotet, just they need to build up the botnet again. So that's what it seems they are trying to do. And it seems it's successful, at least for now.
So you'd expect to see, amongst the threats that we've seen already, obviously talking about the new threat report that's going to be coming out, you'd see them as being a big factor and increasing threat again. Yeah. Yeah.
It seems that they will be again a player in the market, and as you have seen, when they were cut, it changed the whole threat landscape. It can happen again in the opposite direction. So we'll do everything in our power to stop them, but we are also limited.
It's interesting that in many people's minds, when you think of cybersecurity, their mind immediately goes to the sort of malware. They go towards those types of attacks. But we've seen, as we've seen from your presentation, like the RDP attacks and the password stealing is really like the bulk of at least the targeted attacks that's going on. They're trying to get credentials so they can gain in, and then the malware is deployed, and then they're moving sort of laterally. What do you sort of? Can you make any predictions or sort of talk about what you can expect to see from the sort of RDP on the RDP front in the next few months?
As you have seen in the chart that I updated, it seems that the RDP has been dropped, and it seems to be there still. So probably we will see how the war efforts will affect this. Seems like we will be looking at more calmer times, so not that many attacks on the RDP. But on the other hand, there are still a lot of vulnerabilities that haven't been found that can be quite crucial. This year we already had the Log4Spring. So there were other new vulnerabilities out there found and misused by these groups. So they are just waiting for the next thing to come, and they jump on it. So yeah, maybe RDP is not going to be as prevalent, but those other things are not going away.
So in terms of like the next couple of months, or like coming up to what you sort of seen as you just started to put together the threat report, what are the other threats really different, or they're pretty much the same threats that we're seeing as continued?
I would say it's going to be similar, but again, the techniques that, for example, Emotet is using are high volume. So they are going to change the top 10, and they are going to push some of the threats, some of our detections up in the top 10. And we will see also how it changes the landscape geography-wise. So maybe in the geolocations, we will see that they have been shifting from possibly Western Europe to somewhere in the Eastern Europe. There have been quite a few DDoS attacks in the last few days. So maybe they will target other countries as well.
And I think this question has already been answered by you at the end of your slide. Someone asked where to get the threat report. Are they released publicly?
Yes, they are available at We Live Security. You can download even the older editions. So we have it all stored there till the beginning of our time, of the threat report time. and we will be adding new ones every 4 months. Plus, if you're interested in like threat intelligence, more deeper technical information, IOCs, we have also private reports. So those are done by our analysts, and they're providing much more technical. This is like the threat information overview. So if you're interested in the topic, but if you want to have more technical data, Yara rules and stuff like this, then we have also the private reports.